Welcome to the ATA Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Baird, and you're listening to Inside Specialization, our new series on the what, why, and how of specializing in a specific field of translation or interpreting. In each episode, members of ATA's Professional Development Committee will interview translation and interpreting specialists. They'll ask about what the work entails, what skills are needed, the pros and cons, and so much more. The goal is to showcase the variety of career paths in translation and interpreting and help working professionals and students understand what's out there, how they can get started, and what they need to succeed. Specialization is arguably the best way to strengthen your translation and interpreting business and stand out from the crowd. We're hoping to bring you one episode a month, and we hope you'll join us on this informative journey. This podcast is brought to you by the American Translators Association. If you'd like to know more about ATA, we'll have some information at the end of the show. All right, now over to the PD Committee and this edition of Inside Specialization.
Welcome to the latest edition of the ATA Podcast Specialization Series, a special collaboration between the ATA Podcast and ATA's Professional Development Program. My name is Ann Connor, and I'm a member of ATA's Professional Development Committee. We are really excited to bring you this episode with a spotlight on medical interpreting and translation. Joining me today is our special guest, Yuliya Speroff, who is a Russian English, core CHI, and Washington State Department of Social and Health Services certified medical and social services interpreter based in Seattle, Washington. She currently works as a medical interpreter supervisor at Harborview Medical Center. Yuliya has found a way to share her passion for the interpreting profession and language access through teaching continuing education workshops and writing in the Medical Interpreter blog, which focuses on providing medical interpreters with resources and information for professional development. Yuliya is also a trainer and curriculum developer for Americans Against Language Barriers, a nonprofit organization dedicated to improving the care of patients with limited English proficiency by training medical interpreters, providing language services, and advocating for policy reform. Welcome, Yuliya.
Hi, and thank you for having me here.
Oh, you're welcome. Okay, let's get started with my questions. I'm burning desire. This is a field that I'm also very interested in. Number one, how did you start in the field of medical interpreting?
Well, I've always been interested in all things medical. And when I lived in Russia, I was working as a freelance interpreter and translator. And some of my favorite assignments were related to medicine. What I did there was a little bit more similar to conference interpreting. I interpreted at several medical lectures and conferences. So basically, these were medical providers communicating with each other rather than providers communicating with patients and their family members during medical appointments, which is what medical interpreters mostly do here in the US. And then when we moved to the US, my husband started working at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee. And one day he saw an article about a medical interpreting training program there and forwarded it to me. And I felt like it was meant to be. I mean, here I was with some interpreting experience already and my interest in healthcare, trying to figure out my career in the US. And this opportunity came along. It was serendipitous. The course ended up being great. It was 2 semesters long, taught by staff interpreters at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. We also got to shadow staff interpreters working at the hospital and try out interpreting there ourselves. While I was still training, I got contacted by 2 organizations providing interpreter services, and I started contracting with them as a Russian medical interpreter. And my first few interpreting assignments confirmed what I knew from the moment that I saw that article, that this job was exactly what I'd been looking for. And eventually it led me to other things that I love doing: medical interpreter training, writing in my blog, presenting at conferences, and, being a guest on this wonderful podcast.
Oh, and we're so glad you did decide to become a guest and you accepted my invitation. Since you train, I think you really would know the answer to this next question. What skills do interpreters in healthcare settings need to have?
Well, that's a great question. And I have to warn you, I'm going to give you a long list, and it may look long and intimidating until you remember that somebody's health and potentially life may depend on how you do your job. I would say the most important thing is that you have to be highly proficient in English and another language. So what we call your working or target language, whether it's Spanish or Russian or Farsi. You have to know medical terminology in all your working languages and have a sound understanding of the US healthcare system. Then there is the ability to interpret finer points of languages. Register, that's the level of formality of a person's speech, idioms, slang, regionalisms, and even jokes. Interpreters also need interpreting skills. This means being able to perform consecutive and simultaneous interpreting and site translation, and also knowing when each mode is appropriate. You also have to be familiar with interpreting protocols and what to do if things go wrong. In addition, interpreters have to be familiar with codes of ethics and standards of practice for healthcare interpreters and be able to apply them in real-life situations. Last but not least, medical interpreters must be culturally competent to be able to mediate when misunderstandings based on cultural differences arise. See, I told you it'd be a lot.
Wow. My head is spinning again. Sometimes when I interview interpreters and they tell me everything, it's like, wow, we translators have it easy because we have our little, the research things. But anyway, that's wonderful. So can interpreters possessing those skills become certified? And if so, how do they go about doing that?
Absolutely. And not only can, but should get certified. I believe that getting certified is one of the most important things we can do for the professionalization of medical interpreting. On the national level, there are 2 certifications available, offered by the Certification Commission for Healthcare Interpreters, or CCHI, and the National Board for Certified Medical Interpreters, or NBCMI. There are several criteria you have to meet to be eligible to sit for certification exams. 1, you have to be at least 18 years old and have at least a US high school diploma or its equivalent from the US or another country. You have to have linguistic proficiency in English and the language you're looking to get certified in, and provide proof of both. Another important requirement is that you have to complete a minimum of 40 hours of medical interpreting training. Getting this basic training is a very important step, even if you have interpreting experience or a medical background. There are a lot of programs out there offering such classes, and if you allow me, I will shamelessly plug a company that I train for, a nonprofit called Americans Against Language Barriers, which currently offers a 60-hour course for medical interpreters. We're planning to expand it even further. But I'd say whatever program you choose, I'd probably go and find one that offers live training, whether it's in person or online. Of course, now it's much more likely to be online, because you can just learn so much from interacting with your trainers and especially your peers. And, to this day, I still think back to some of the things that trainers on the course that I took said to us and taught us, and I still use them to this day. So I think, being there with them just made a bigger impact on me than if I were to watch a video. But back to certification. So once you meet all of the criteria, you then look at whether you will be able to get a full certification or sort of a core, like an initial credential. Both certifying bodies have 2 options. So option 1 is full certification, which involves passing both a written exam in English and an oral exam in English and the target language. Full certification is available in Arabic, Mandarin, and Spanish with CCHI, and Spanish, Russian, Mandarin, Cantonese, Korean, and Vietnamese with NBCMI. For all other languages, you can obtain a credential which involves taking a written exam only, called Core CHI and Hub CMI, respectively. There are also some state-based certification programs, namely in Oregon and Washington, but I feel like one of the national certifications is a safer bet because they universally accepted pretty much wherever you work, which will definitely come in handy if you happen to move to another state or if you decide to work remotely. And so if you are interested in getting certified, I would say go to the websites of the certifying bodies to find all of the latest information, the cost, the requirements, whether you can take it online or whether you have to take to a place to do this. So really do your research to see what's available to you based on your language, based on your location.
Wow, that's wonderful. That's a lot of information, and I was taking notes ferociously. You may not know the answer to this question, but I'm just curious. Are most medical interpreters on staff in hospitals? Are they independent contractors, or does it depend on the language?
Great question. And you're right, I don't have the exact numbers, but I would think it's safe to say that most interpreters are independent contractors because some hospitals, they do have a staff of interpreters. Some hospitals do not. They may have a single person that is responsible for either coordinating interpreters or just contracting with agencies. And then even if a hospital or another healthcare facility does have a staff of interpreters, they may still rely on outside vendors, which can be remote, in person, or both to fill some gaps. So this could be languages that are not on staff. This could be just requests outside of regular working hours. So I know in our hospital where we have over 400 daily encounters with interpreters, we definitely rely on vendors as well as on our staff.
Great. And what would a typical day look like for a medical interpreter?
Well, that really depends on whether you're a staff interpreter or you work freelance, on whether you work in person, over the phone, or on video. I can tell you that when I worked as a freelance medical interpreter, my days were never the same. But a typical day involved a lot of driving between clinics and hospitals in Seattle and surrounding towns. There was lots of waiting for appointments to start. And I never really knew if my next interpreting encounter would be something very routine or if it would be the worst or the best day of somebody's life. Just to give you one example, there was this day when I had a very full day of interpreting all over Seattle, and I was driving home at the end of the day. I was looking forward to dinner and just collapsing on the sofa. And then I get a call from an agency, and they asked me if I wanted to go to this local hospital where somebody was having a baby. I agreed, and I ended up staying there until 5 a.m. And so I was really tired. I was hungry. I was dreading the following day because I had to work. And, it was kind of hard, but I got to see a brand new baby enter this world. And that was just amazing. I was floating in clouds the whole next day, both from sleep deprivation and just from, being able to witness that wonderful thing.
A miracle, really?
Yeah, exactly. The miracle of life. But on the other hand, there would be days when I had a full schedule and all of a sudden I'd have patients who didn't come in and appointments that were canceled. And I'd find myself with lots of downtime and I'd be able to do something cool, like take my dog swimming in a lake on a random weekday afternoon.
Yeah. So I guess during the pandemic, you did a lot of remote or mostly or all remote.
I still, because the agencies I worked with, a lot of one of the agencies was contracted with a local cancer care center. And so that is essential services that continued even during the pandemic, and they were outpatient. And so I continued interpreting in person.
Right. I guess with the universal precautions that everyone was taking, right? The mask and all, right?
Exactly. The agency was wonderful, and the agency and the facility were both wonderful in making sure we had all of the appropriate PPE. That was the first place where I learned about having to have eye protection, and I had my own face shield. So I felt really well supported. I was fortunate. It wasn't always the experience with every place I went to, but in that particular clinic where I interpreted a lot, I had a very good experience.
Wonderful. Glad to hear that. All right. So what do you like best about medical interpreting, and what do you like the least?
I really like the feeling that you're helping somebody in a very tangible way, and you're providing a very necessary and a meaningful service. And, when a patient tells me that they finally understand what is happening to them, or I see that they're able to express themselves in a way that they want, whether they want to ask lots of questions or whether they want to complain about something, that just feels great. And, I myself lived in another country where I lived in Turkey where I spoke Turkish, but, it was very conversational Turkish. And I had to go to the emergency department once. And really, when I was feeling unwell and I was sort of panicking, it was very hard for me to find the words. And it was even harder to understand the answers and the explanations, because when you don't really know what people are saying to you, you can imagine all kinds of worst case scenarios.
Oof,
And so, right. And so when an interpreter, the next day I was able to to have a follow-up appointment with an interpreter, it was such a relief to know that, it wasn't anything super bad. So I know firsthand what it means to have someone who can make communication happen. What I don't like is how medical interpreters are sometimes treated. We are members of the healthcare team. Our presence is vital for safe and effective patient care, and yet we aren't always treated accordingly. People don't always realize that this is a real profession that requires significant investment of time and money, both into getting certified, getting trained, and then for continuous professional development. One time a patient said to me, "Hey, you look so professional and your English is excellent. Why don't you get a real job?" And, and I'm sure they were trying to pay me a compliment, but it just felt so hurtful on behalf of all of my fellow medical interpreters, because it is a real job. I pay taxes, I'm certified, I have a badge, how much more real can you get?
Yeah.
So I'd really like to see medical interpreters being more universally recognized as professionals.
Of course. Wow. Great answers. Okay, now what advice would you give a professional interpreter who's interested in specializing in the medical arena?
I would say definitely get some training. If you already have an interpreting background, your question talks about professional interpreters. I think that's great. It will serve you really well. But you now need to learn about how everything works in the world of medical interpreting. Just to give you one example, conference interpreters probably do a lot of simultaneous interpreting. Well, in medical interpreting for spoken languages, the golden standard is a consecutive interpretation, just because of the accuracy, because we don't have the necessary technical setup to do simultaneous, right? So that's like one thing. The ethical standards differ significantly between, say, court and medical interpreting. So it's really important to learn the lay of the land. And then depending on where you are with medical terminology and your knowledge of healthcare in general, in addition to training, I would say start reading up, start learning all about it. I have lots of resources on the Medical Interpreter blog, from conventional resources such as reference texts and patient education to less conventional like books, podcasts, and TV shows. So don't laugh. I'm a huge fan of Grey's Anatomy. And yes, I'll be the first to admit that lots of medical details are wildly inaccurate. Working in a hospital myself, I just sit and laugh out loud at some of the things they do. How some people watch sports and they shout at the TV, yes. Right? That's what I do with Grey's Anatomy. Don't touch your mask. You're not supposed to put your hands on your mask. Where's your eye protection? That sort of thing. But despite that, it's still very rich with medical terminology. Like if you take any medical scene from that show, you can pick up 10 medical terms from just a few minutes of watching it, Wow. So I still think reading a book written by a doctor, some sort of memoir about their life and work, listening to a podcast about medical things, that's a really great way to pick up some of that background knowledge.
Great, thank you. And I just happen to think when you mentioned the medical interpreter blog, can you just give that for our listeners? So in case anyone is listening and really wants to get more information about that, can you give us the URL?
Yeah, it's very easy. Medicalinterpreterblog.com. All one word, medicalinterpreterblog.com.
Wonderful. Because I'm just starting in the field after being many years medical translator and legal translator, and having the COVID kind of put a dent in my in my income. So I love it. I just took the Bridging the Gap and passed that with 98%. I'm so proud.
Wow, congratulations.
Thank you. But yeah, I really do need to go and do further. So I'm going to probably check out the other site that you were talking about. Can you give me the name of that one again?
Oh, Americans Against Language Barriers offers medical interpreter training, aalb.org. And then, my blog, obviously, I'm proud of the work I do, but there are lots and lots of great blogs out there, and I link to them in my blog as well. So I really like collecting resources, like all of the Facebook groups for medical interpreters and all of the other blogs written by medical interpreters. So hopefully it'll be a good starting off point for
I'm sure
beginning medical interpreters.
Yes, I'm really sure of that. You've really given us a lot of information so far, which I appreciate. Now, if there are any students listening, because I know a lot of students of languages pay attention to the ATA website and all of the resources that we have, the Savvy Newcomer blog and all of the resources. So what would you say if someone's studying languages and is interested in a career as a medical interpreter?
I would say all of the above, get trained, get certified, and keep learning. And congratulations on choosing such a meaningful and rewarding profession. Welcome to lifelong learning.
That is so true. And I feel even as a translator, a medical translator and legal translator, what I love about doing what I do with languages is that we learn new words every day. And even in my native language of English, and I'm sure you see the same thing with Russian, right? You learn some new words
Absolutely.
in your native language, right?
And you have to keep up with the language. I traveled to Russia in August, and there were things where I was like, really? That's how you say this now? And my brother is 22 years old. He's getting a master's degree in linguistics. And so from time to time, I'll just write to him and say, hey, what are real Russian people saying for this word, or how would you say this word in Russian? Because I know there are dictionaries, and obviously I'm a native Russian speaker, but I feel like you really have to keep up with what's going on with the language.
Yes, I agree. And I know my colleagues at the Delaware Valley Translators Association Philadelphia say the same thing. If they don't get to go back to their home country, they just, Skype or Zoom with their relatives in that country just to hear, what's being said nowadays so that they can keep up or read the journals or things like that. And I know when I was taking time off when my twins were little, I watched telenovelas, like the soap operas in Spanish, and there's a lot of medical terminology, a lot of legal terminology in there. And just so I could keep up with hearing the language from, most of the 23 different Spanish speaking markets, the soap operas were from all over the world. So that really helped me while I was sitting there nursing my twins and not doing anything else. But it was great.
Wonderful. Yeah. See, that's a great example of infotainment, which I'm a huge fan of, as you can tell. So thank you for also providing these great examples.
Right. And nowadays, too, with the streaming services, you can find movies from all over the world, and a lot of times they're dubbed and subtitled, so you can be feasting two different pathways to your brain at the same time, like looking at it. And because I'm sure I didn't ask this, but how much of your work is site translation, like with documents that they have to hold up, and conform consents? Do you do much of those?
Not a whole lot. And when I was working as a freelance medical interpreter, different facilities would have different rules when it came to site translations. There was one facility that said absolutely not, just interpreting and that is it. No written translation, no site translation. So occasionally, yes, but I wouldn't say a whole lot. But that, again, really depends on what, setting you are in. Obviously, if you're working over the phone, you will never do site translation, but potentially with video and then in person, depending on where you are.
Right. And I know I learned in my course recently that they said, too, the patient should be there in case they have questions about the meaning, right? That you should never just go, like the provider should never leave you in the room to site translate, because what if the patient doesn't understand that high register technology, terminology?
Absolutely. Yes. So best case scenario, site translation with a provider or another member of staff present. And then the next best thing, if that does happen, if somebody, if you're site translating a questionnaire and it says, do you have hepatitis? And the patient says, what is hepatitis? Then not, even though as a trained medical interpreter, you obviously will know what it is, not explaining and saying, well, thank you for asking this question. Why don't I put, a little star here, and we'll ask the provider when they come back, or going and finding a provider to answer that question. or, not extrapolating, because then, if you have a question that says, how often would you say, you don't sleep very well? And then it says often, very often, occasionally, sometimes. And the patient says, I don't sleep very well 2 nights a week. What would you say this is, often or very often? So again, not trying to answer for the patient, but either letting them pick an answer or waiting for the provider to return.
Wow, that's a very good point. Well, I don't want to take any more of your time, but I really, really thank you for taking the time again to be interviewed and to let our audience know what a typical day and a typical career as a medical interpreter is. And again, hopefully we will meet each other at a future language conference. And it was great meeting you.
I would love that. I hope we do get to meet either in person or virtually. And thank you so much for having me here and for allowing me to talk about medical interpreting. It's been a pleasure.
You've been listening to Inside Specialization, our new series on the what, why, and how of specializing in a specific field of translation or interpreting. Big thanks to everyone involved in the production of this episode. ATA's PD committee developed and coordinated the interview. Mixing and editing was done by Derek Platz. Mary David and Rashawn Paccarel at ATA headquarters provided editorial and technical support. Now, if you learned anything new in today's podcast, I bet there's somebody out there who would like to know it too. Don't be stingy. Tell them about us. I've gotten to know so many great podcasts that way. I promise they'll thank you for it. And if you're not an ATA member, listen up. I've been a member for over 20 years. I can honestly say that ATA launched my freelance career, and I've never looked back. Nowadays, the demand for translators and interpreters is at an all-time high, but finding quality work isn't easy. ATA membership can make a difference. And ATA isn't just for translators or interpreters. Individuals, companies, and organizations can become members. We have teachers, professors, hospital administrators, language company owners, technology developers, as well as language companies, universities, hospitals, and government agencies. Go to ATA's website, atanet.org, for details. Or check out past episodes of this podcast where we talk about the benefits of membership and what's currently happening in the association. Thanks again for listening, everyone. Talk to you again soon.